She tried to sell her father's horse for $10, but the rancher saw the truth in her eyes. By the time Clara Whitcomb reached the dusty gate of Red Lantern Ranch, she had already said goodbye to her horse 3 times. The first goodbye had been in the barn, where the morning light slipped through the cracks in the boards and laid thin golden lines across Dusty's white coat. The second had been halfway down the trail, when the gelding turned his head and pushed his nose against her boot, like he knew her heart was breaking. The third had been at the edge of Willow Creek, where she stopped long enough to wipe her face with the heel of her hand before anyone could see. Now she sat straight in the saddle, her fingers tight around the reins, with $10 standing between her and the loss of everything her father had left behind. The ranch yard was busy in the late afternoon. Men moved hay from a wagon. A blacksmith's hammer rang from the far shed. 2 horses stamped near the water trough, swishing their tails at flies. Dust rolled low across the ground, carrying the smell of leather, sun-baked wood, and cattle. Clara did not belong there. Not any more than a candle belonged in a thunderstorm, but she had come because her father's last words had sent her. "If trouble ever corners you, take Dusty to Samuel Reed," he had told her, his voice thin with sickness. "He'll know what to do with a good horse." At the time, Clara had thought he meant Dusty would be safe there. She had not known how much of that sentence would one day hurt. A tall man stepped out from the open barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. Samuel Reed was not handsome in the easy way some men were handsome. He had a weathered face, quiet eyes, and shoulders shaped by years of work. He looked like a man who did not waste words because he knew what each one cost. He paused when he saw her. "Miss Whitcomb," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes moved from her face to Dusty, then back again. Clara hated that. She hated being read so quickly. "Mr. Reed," she answered. He walked toward the gate and opened it without asking why she had come. That small courtesy nearly undid her. A rough man would have made it easier. A proud man would have let her stay angry. But Samuel Reed only stood there, hat in hand, waiting. Clara climbed down from the saddle. Her boots touched the ground, and for one dizzy second she feared her knees might give out. She had not eaten since dawn. She had spent the morning baking bread for Mrs. Harlan, mending 2 torn shirts for the shopkeeper's wife, and selling her mother's blue serving bowl to a woman who did not know what it had meant. All of it had brought her to $6.30. The tax notice needed 16 by sunset. "I need to sell him," Clara said. The words came out plain and cruel. Samuel looked at Dusty. The horse stood still, one ear tilted toward Clara as if waiting to hear her take it back. Samuel did not say what most men would have said. He did not ask if she was sure. He did not tell her a horse like that was worth more than she knew. He only waited, and in that waiting Clara felt the weight of every mile she had ridden. "I need $10, she said. "I know he is worth more, I know it. But 10 is what I need today, and 10 is what I am asking." A breeze moved through the ranch yard and lifted the loose strands of hair against her cheek. Somewhere behind the barn, a horse gave a low nicker. Dusty shifted closer until his shoulder brushed hers. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Who is pressing you?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "Martin Pike." At that name, something changed in Samuel's eyes. Not anger exactly, but a hard stillness. "He bought the county tax claims last winter," she said. "My father fell behind before he passed. I have been paying what I could, but Pike says if I do not bring the rest before sundown, he will file on the place come morning." "The Whitcomb place?" Samuel asked. Clara lifted her chin. "Yes." "That land has been in your family nearly 20 years. 21, she said. Samuel looked toward the west, where the sun had already started slipping behind the line of cottonwoods. The light was turning red along the edges, making the ranch buildings look as if they had been touched by fire. "How much do you have?" he asked. $6.30. "And you need 16. "Yes." "And you rode here to sell me the only horse your father left you." Clara's eyes burned, but she would not cry in front of him. She had promised herself that on the trail. Tears were for later when the house was dark and no one was listening. "He left me more than a horse," she said quietly. "He left me a roof that leaks, a field that needs plowing, a well rope about to snap, and a name folks think they can lean on because there is no man left to answer the door." Samuel looked at her then, truly looked at her, and Clara wished he had looked away. "My father trusted you," she said. "He said you would treat Dusty right." Samuel stepped closer to the horse and lifted one hand. Dusty sniffed his palm, then allowed him to touch the white blaze on his forehead. The tenderness of it cut deeper than any insult could have. "He was a fine judge of horses," Samuel said. "He was a fine judge of people too," Clara replied, and her voice trembled just enough to shame her. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Samuel turned and looked toward the ranch house. It was larger than Clara expected, though not grand. The porch needed sweeping. A lantern hung crooked beside the door. The kitchen window was open, and through it she saw a curtain moving in the wind, loose from one nail. Everything about the place looked strong from a distance and lonely up close. Samuel put his hat back on. "I will not buy your horse for $10, he said. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Of course. Pride had carried her this far, but pride could not make a man pay for what he did not want. She reached for Dusty's reins before her hands could start shaking. "I understand," she whispered. "No," Samuel said. "I don't think you do." She looked up. His voice stayed low. "I will not take the last living piece of your father from you for a price that would shame both of us." Clara's fingers tightened around the leather. "Then I have wasted your time." "You have not. I need the money before sundown." "I know." "Then please, do not make this harder than it already is." Samuel glanced at the sun, then toward the house again. When he looked back, his face carried the look of a man stepping across a line he had drawn for himself long ago. "My cook left in July," he said. "My books are behind. My storehouse is a disgrace. Half my men eat whatever they can burn in a pan, and I have paid twice for flour I cannot find. I need someone with steady hands and a clear head to put this house in order." Clara stared at him. "This is not charity," he said before she could speak. "It is work, fair work. $3 a week, room if weather turns bad, feed for Dusty, and $10 advance today against wages." The ranch yard seemed to fall silent around her. Even the hammering from the shed stopped. Clara wanted to refuse. She wanted to say she had not come begging. She wanted to say she could manage on her own because she had been saying it for 11 months, and sometimes a person kept saying a thing because if they stopped, they might find out it was not true. But Dusty's warm breath touched her sleeve, and the sun kept sinking. Samuel did not move closer. He did not soften his voice. He gave her the dignity of stillness, and somehow that made the offer harder to distrust. "My father told me to bring Dusty to you," Clara said. Samuel's eyes flickered. "Yes," he said. She looked at the crooked lantern by his door, the dusty porch, the open kitchen window, and the man standing before her with work in his hands and sorrow hidden somewhere behind his quiet face. Maybe her father had known more than he had said. "All right," Clara whispered. "I will take the position." Samuel nodded once, as if they had settled a business matter and nothing more. But when he turned toward the house to fetch the money, Clara saw him pause beside Dusty and rest his hand for one brief moment on the horse's neck. It was not the touch of a buyer. It was the touch of a man keeping a promise. And Clara, standing in the red dust of Red Lantern Ranch with the whole of her future trembling in front of her, suddenly wondered what else her father had known before he died. Clara paid Martin Pike with 15 minutes of daylight left. He sat behind his desk in the county tax office with his coat buttoned too tight across his stomach and a silver watch open in his palm, as if he had been waiting for the pleasure of watching the hour defeat her. The office smelled of ink, old paper, and the sour smoke from a stove that needed cleaning. Behind him, shelves leaned under the weight of ledgers that had swallowed more land than drought ever had. Clara placed the $10 note and the rest of her coins on his desk. Pike looked down at the money. Then he looked up at her. "Well," he said slowly, "that is a surprise." Clara kept her hands at her sides so he would not see them tremble. "It is the amount due," she said. Pike picked up the note, held it to the light and rubbed it between his fingers. Good money travels fast when a woman gets desperate. The insult slid across the room like a snake. Clara said nothing. She had learned that some men spoke that way because they wanted a woman to prove she was hurt. She would not give him that gift. "Receipt," she said. Pike's smile thinned. He dipped his pen, opened the ledger, and wrote with small, sharp strokes. The scratching sound filled the room. Clara watched every mark. Her father had always told her never to look away when a man wrote numbers that could cost you land. Pike tore off the receipt and held it out. When Clara reached for it, he did not let go at once. "One payment does not save a sinking farm, Miss Whitcomb," he said. "Winter has a long memory, so do debts." Clara met his eyes. "Then I will remember them too." She took the receipt and left before he could answer. Outside, Willow Creek was wrapped in red evening light. The little town sat quiet under a sky streaked with gold and smoke-purple clouds. A wagon rolled past the dry goods store. Two boys chased each other near the water pump. Somewhere, a woman called a child in for supper. The world had not changed, but Clara had. She stood on the boardwalk and pressed the receipt into her coat pocket, right beside the small handkerchief her father had carried until the day he died. For the first time since dawn, she breathed without pain in her chest. Dusty waited at the hitching rail, his white coat catching the last light. She went to him and touched her forehead to his neck. "I still have you," she whispered. The horse shifted his weight and blew warm air against her sleeve. Clara rode home under a darkening sky. The trail to the Whitcomb place passed cottonwoods, dry grass, and a narrow creek that whispered over stone. Every fence post looked familiar. Every bend in the road carried her father's ghost. She could still see him riding ahead of her, his old brown hat tilted against the sun, his voice calling back to her not to let Dusty choose the pace. The house came into view just after dusk. Small, weathered, stubborn. A lamp burned in the front window because Clara had left it there that morning, not knowing if she would return with her horse or with an empty lead rope. Seeing it now nearly broke her. She led Dusty to the barn, brushed him longer than needed, and filled his manger with the last of the good hay. "You will eat better tomorrow," she promised. Inside the house, silence waited for her. Clara removed her coat, folded it over the chair, and set Pike's receipt in the tin box under the loose floorboard near the stove. Her father had hidden cash there once. Now it held receipts, tax notices, her mother's wedding ribbon, and a letter Clara had never been brave enough to open again. It was the last letter her father had written before fever took his strength. She touched it, then shut the tin box. Not tonight. Tonight she boiled coffee, sliced yesterday's bread, and sat at the table while the walls creaked around her. She should have felt safe. Instead, Samuel Reed's offer sat heavy in the room. $3 a week, feed for Dusty, work not charity, a place to stay if weather turned bad. Clara pressed both hands around her coffee cup. The warmth steadied her. She told herself she had accepted only because she needed wages. She told herself Red Lantern Ranch was just another house needing order. She told herself Samuel Reed was only a man who had honored her father's trust, but she could not forget the way he had refused to buy Dusty. Not with pity, not with pride, with respect. The next morning, Clara rose before the sun. Frost silvered the grass outside. Her breath showed faintly in the kitchen as she stirred the stove awake. She packed 2 biscuits, tied her hair at the nape of her neck, and put on her plain blue dress with the mended cuff. Before leaving, she stood in her father's room. It had not changed much. His boots remained under the bed. His coat hung from a peg. His Bible rested on the small table, a dried leaf pressed between its pages. Clara did not like going in there, but that morning she needed to. "I took the work," she said softly. The room answered with silence. "I do not know if that was what you meant." A faint wind moved along the window frame, making the glass tick once. Clara swallowed, then turned away before memory could pull her under. At Red Lantern Ranch, the men were already awake. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. Horses stamped in the cold. A gray dog lifted its head from the porch, studied Clara, and decided she was not trouble. Samuel came out of the barn with a saddle blanket over one shoulder. "You came early," he said. You said your storehouse was a disgrace, Clara replied. One corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. It did not improve overnight. He led Dusty to a clean paddock near the barn. Fresh hay waited there, along with a full water trough. Clara noticed that before she noticed anything else. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel. Samuel saw her looking. "He is part of the arrangement," he said. "He will be cared for as such." Clara nodded because she did not trust her voice. Inside the ranch house, the trouble began before she reached the kitchen. There were boots by the stove, flour sacks by the back door, a cracked lantern on the table, and a pile of unpaid bills tucked under a coffee mug. The pantry was worse. Beans spilled from one torn sack. Sugar sat too close to lamp oil. Dried apples had gone soft in a tin that had not been closed properly. A mouse had found the cornmeal before any person had. Clara stood in the doorway and stared. Behind her, a ranch hand with a red beard leaned in and said, "Ma'am, we mostly know where things are." Clara looked at him. "That is unfortunate." He blinked. Samuel, standing near the kitchen table, lowered his eyes as if hiding amusement. The ranch hand cleared his throat. "Name S. Caleb." "Clara Whitcomb," she said. "And by supper, Caleb, none of you will know where anything is. That will be the first sign this house is improving." Caleb stared at her, then looked at Samuel. Samuel only said, "You heard her." By noon, Clara had thrown out spoiled food, moved the lamp oil outside, washed 3 shelves, and started a list of supplies written in columns neat enough to make her father proud. By late afternoon, she had found 2 unpaid invoices, 1 overcharge, and a letter tucked beneath the account book with her father's name written across the front. Clara froze. The handwriting was Samuel's. She stood alone in the kitchen while the wind pushed against the window and the house settled around her. Slowly she lifted the letter. It had never been sent. And on the folded edge in faded ink were the words, "For Edward Whitcomb, concerning Clara." Clara did not open the letter right away. She stood in the middle of Samuel Reed's kitchen with flour dust on her sleeves, a broom leaning against the table, and the folded paper trembling lightly between her fingers. Outside, men called to one another near the corral. A horse kicked against a stall door. The gray dog on the porch barked once at nothing and then fell silent. The whole ranch kept moving, but Clara could not. For Edward Whitcomb, concerning Clara. Her father's name looked strange in Samuel's handwriting. Not wrong exactly, just too private, too close to something she had not known existed. She turned the paper over. The seal had never been broken. That meant her father had never read it. That meant Samuel had written it and chosen not to send it. A quiet unease moved through her. Had Samuel known about the debt before she came? Had her father asked him to watch over her? Had the offer at the gate been planned long before Clara swallowed her pride and rode there with Dusty? The thought made her cheeks burn. She did not want to be anyone's duty, not her father's, not Samuel Reed's, not any man's. She set the letter on the table and stepped back from it as if it might speak on its own. At that moment, Caleb came through the back door carrying an armload of split wood. He stopped when he saw her face. "Something wrong, Miss Whitcomb." Clara folded the letter once more and slipped it into the pocket of her apron before he could read the name. "No," she said. "Put that wood by the stove, please." Caleb gave her a long look but did as he was told. By supper, the kitchen smelled of beans, cornbread, and fried onions. It was not fancy, but it was warm, steady food, the kind men ate in silence because their mouths were too busy to complain. Clara watched from the stove as the ranch hands took their plates around the long table. Caleb tasted the beans first. Then he looked up like he had discovered religion. "Mr. Reed," he said, "I believe this house has seen a miracle." One of the younger hands laughed. Samuel, seated at the end of the table, looked at Clara with that calm gaze of his. "She found the salt," he said. "I found many things," Clara replied. "Some of them should have been found months ago." That earned a few quiet chuckles. Even Samuel's mouth softened. For one small moment, Clara felt the room settle around her in a way she did not expect. The men were still strangers. The house was not hers. The work was only beginning. Yet there was something in the sound of spoons against bowls, in the lantern light moving across the wood floor, in Dusty's soft nicker outside the kitchen window, that made the ache in her chest loosen. Then she felt the letter in her pocket and the warmth faded. After supper she washed dishes while Samuel carried 2 buckets of water from the pump. He did not have to. She knew that. Men who owned 500 acres did not usually haul kitchen water for the woman they had hired, but he brought it in without a word and set it beside the stove. "Thank you," Clara said. He nodded. "You did a full day's work." "I was paid for it." "That does not make thanks unnecessary." She glanced at him. He looked tired. Dust clung to his shirt. A faint line marked his brow, and his right hand opened and closed once, like an old ache had woken in the knuckles. For the first time, Clara wondered what kind of loneliness had been living in this house before she entered it with her broom and her ledgers. She almost asked about the letter. Instead, she said, "Your pantry nearly caught fire before I arrived." "I had suspected it was poorly arranged." Mr. Reed, flour was resting against lamp oil. That sounds worse when said aloud. It was worse in person. This time Samuel truly smiled. It was brief and quiet, but it changed his face. It made him look younger and sadder at the same time. Clara looked away first. The next 2 days passed with hard work and harder questions. Clara sorted invoices, counted sacks, labeled jars, and moved through the house like a woman trying to bring order to someone else's weather. The ranch hands learned quickly not to argue when she moved things. Caleb only made that mistake once more, when he asked why coffee could not stay in the same tin it had always stayed in. "Because that tin has a nail hole in it," Clara said. "It is a small hole. So is the eye of a needle, but I would not store coffee in one." After that, Caleb carried the tin outside without another word. On Saturday afternoon, Clara found Samuel in the small office behind the kitchen. It was not really an office yet. It was a room where papers had gone to surrender. Bills lay in stacks. Receipts were folded into old envelopes. A ranch map hung crooked on the wall. Beneath the window sat a desk scarred by knife marks and ink stains. Samuel stood beside it, holding one of the ledgers she had organized. "You found the March cattle payment," he said, "in a flour sack." His eyes closed for a moment. "Of course. You also paid Mr. Avery twice for a wagon wheel." Samuel opened his eyes. "Did I?" "Yes." "Was it at least a good wheel?" "No." He sighed. Clara placed a clean sheet of paper on the desk. "I have written what must be paid first, what can wait, and what should be questioned. Your ranch is not in trouble, Mr. Reed, but it is leaking money through carelessness." He accepted the paper and studied it. "My father kept the books." "Then your father was better at this than you are." "He was better at many things." There was no bitterness in his voice, only truth. Clara watched his thumb move over the edge of the ledger. A small scar crossed the back of his hand, pale against sun-dark skin. "He died suddenly?" she asked. Samuel's gaze stayed on the page. "Horse rolled on him in a ravine. I found him before dark." Clara's breath caught softly. "I am sorry." He nodded once. "That was 6 years ago." The room went quiet. Clara knew that kind of quiet. It was not empty. It was crowded with things nobody had said in time. "I was not ready to run this place," Samuel said, "but land does not wait for grief to finish." "No," Clara said, "it does not." For a moment they stood on opposite sides of the desk, 2 people tied by different losses and the same hard lesson. Then Samuel folded the paper she had written. "You have done more in 3 days than I have managed in 3 months." "It is only order," Clara said. "No," he replied, "it is care made visible." The word struck her more deeply than she expected. She had spent nearly a year caring for a dying farm, a grieving house, a horse, a memory, a name. Most people had called it stubbornness. Samuel called it care. She reached into her apron pocket before fear could stop her. "I found something," she said. Samuel looked at the folded letter in her hand. The change in him was immediate. His shoulders stilled. His face did not harden, but it closed in some quiet way. "Where?" he asked. "Under the account book." He looked toward the window. Outside, winter light lay pale over the yard. "I forgot it was there," he said. "That is not an answer." "No," he said, "it is not." Clara placed the letter on the desk between them. "Why did you write to my father about me?" Samuel did not reach for it. His silence frightened her more than any answer could have. At last he said, "Because your father asked me a question the month before he died." "What question?" Samuel looked at her then, and there was something in his eyes she had not seen before. Regret, perhaps, or a burden carried badly. "He asked what kind of man I would be," Samuel said, "if you ever came to my gate with nowhere else to go." Clara's throat tightened. "And what did you answer?" Samuel looked down at the unopened letter. "I answered too late," he said. The wind pushed against the window frame. Somewhere outside, Dusty gave a soft call from the paddock. Clara stared at the letter lying between them, no longer sure whether opening it would give her the truth or take something from her she was not ready to lose. If this moment touched your heart, stay with Clara a little longer, because some letters on the frontier were never meant to stay hidden forever. Clara did not open the letter in Samuel Reed's office. She wanted to. Her hand even moved toward it once, slow and uncertain, while Samuel stood across from her with the look of a man waiting for a sentence he had earned. But the moment felt too small for what the letter carried. That little office with its crooked ranch map and ink-stained desk could hold bills, receipts, cattle records, and unpaid accounts. It could not hold her father's voice. So she picked up the letter and slipped it back into her apron pocket. "Not here," she said. Samuel nodded. "That is yours to decide." Clara studied him for a moment. "Did my father know he was dying when he asked you that question?" Samuel's eyes lowered. "I believe he did." The answer settled over her like cold dust. Her father had hidden his fear well. Toward the end, Edward Whitcomb had still asked about fence repairs, feed prices, and whether the north field could be planted by spring. He had still made Clara read the account book aloud when fever blurred his eyes. He had still smiled at Dusty through the window and told the horse not to get lazy just because winter was coming. But maybe he had known. Maybe he had looked at his only daughter and understood the world would be less kind once his chair sat empty. "What else did he ask of you?" Clara said. Samuel's face tightened. "Only that." "Only to decide what kind of man you would be." "Yes." "And you answered in a letter you never sent." "I wrote it the same night," Samuel said. "Then I read it in the morning and saw too much pride in it." Clara frowned. "Pride?" "It sounded like a promise made to myself, not to him. Like I was certain I would know what was best for you if trouble came." His voice stayed even, but his hand curled once against the desk. "Your father did not ask me to take charge of your life. He asked me a question. I feared my answer misunderstood him." Clara looked down at the folded paper in her pocket. She did not know whether that explanation comforted her or unsettled her more. A shout rose from outside. Samuel turned at once. Another shout followed, this one sharper. Clara and Samuel hurried from the office into the kitchen, then out onto the porch. The afternoon had darkened while they talked. Low clouds pressed over the valley, heavy and gray. Wind dragged loose hay across the yard. Near the far corral, Caleb waved one arm. "Mr. Reed." Samuel was already moving. Clara followed him across the yard, lifting her skirt clear of the mud. Dusty stood alert in the paddock, his ears forward. Several cattle had crowded against the south fence beyond the barn, restless and bawling. "What happened?" Samuel called. "South gate's open," Caleb said. "Don't know how." 20 head slipped toward Miller's draw. Samuel's jaw set. Saddle blew. "Storm's coming in," Caleb said. "I can see that." Another hand ran toward the barn. Clara looked beyond the fence toward the far slope. A curtain of rain had begun falling in the distance, dimming the hills. If cattle reached the draw in bad weather, they could scatter into the wash or break toward Pike's grazing strip. Pike. The name struck her sharply. "When was the gate last checked?" Samuel asked. "This morning," Caleb said. I checked it myself." Samuel looked toward the open country, then back at the men. "Caleb, take Jonah and ride east. Keep them out of the wash. I'll cut south." "I'll ride too," Clara said. Every man turned toward her. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. "No." The word was quick, too quick. Clara's chin lifted. "Dusty knows rough ground better than half the horses here. The wind is turning. I have ridden in wind before. This is ranch work. And I have handled cattle before, Mr. Reed. I did not spend 21 years on painted dishes and hymn books." Caleb suddenly became very interested in his gloves. Samuel looked at the sky, then at the open fence, then at Clara. His face showed the struggle of a man learning, with visible difficulty, not to decide for her. At last he said, "You stay on the ridge. Do not drop into the draw unless I signal." Clara gave one sharp nod. "Fair." Dusty was saddled within minutes. The old white horse seemed to understand the urgency, and moved with a strength that made Clara's heart ache. Rain began before they cleared the south pasture, cold drops striking Clara's cheeks and darkening the shoulders of her dress. The land beyond Red Lantern Ranch rolled downward into brush, gullies, and low grass beaten flat by winter. The cattle had spread in a loose line, frightened by thunder. Samuel rode ahead on a blue roan, his coat snapping in the wind. Caleb and Jonah swept wide to the east. Clara held Dusty along the ridge just as Samuel had ordered, but her eyes searched the ground below. That was when she saw the fresh cut on the gate rope. Not broken, cut. The loose end whipped against the post in the wind, clean as a knife mark. Clara's stomach tightened. This was not carelessness. This was not weather. Someone had opened Samuel Reed's fence on purpose. A flash of lightning lit the slope. In that white blink, Clara saw more movement near Miller's draw. Not cattle, a rider. Dark coat, low hat, keeping close to the brush. The rider turned his horse toward Willow Creek. Clara did not think. She touched her heels to Dusty's sides. The old horse leapt forward. She heard Samuel shout her name behind her, but the wind tore the sound apart. Dusty ran along the ridge with sure feet, his mane whipping against Clara's hands. The rider below glanced back once and kicked hard toward the creek trail. Clara knew that trail. It curved near the abandoned lime shed before joining the road to town. If the rider reached it, he would vanish into traffic before dark. Rain blurred her vision, but not enough. A scrap of red cloth fluttered from the rider's saddlebag. Clara had seen that cloth before. Martin Pike wore a red silk band at his watch chain, bright as spilled paint against his black vest. "Go, Dusty," she whispered. The horse stretched beneath her, strong and steady, carrying not just Clara but every warning her father had ever given her about men who smiled over ledgers. The rider reached the lime shed first. He veered behind it, and for one breath Clara lost him. She pulled Dusty up hard near the broken stone wall, rain running down her face. The world smelled of wet dirt and old lime dust. Then she heard a horse stumble. Around the far side of the shed the rider cursed. Clara guided Dusty forward and saw him struggling to free his horse's hoof from a tangle of wire. His hat had fallen. His coat was soaked. It was not Martin Pike. It was his clerk, Amos Bell. The same thin man who had written Clara's receipt while Pike watched the clock. Amos froze when he saw her. For a moment, the only sound was rain striking the shed roof and Dusty breathing hard beneath her. "Miss Whitcomb," Amos said, his voice shaking. "You best ride on." Clara's hand tightened around the reins. "Did Pike send you?" she asked. Amos looked past her toward the ridge. "Ride on," he said again. "You do not know what he is willing to take." Before Clara could answer, Samuel came through the rain behind her, his horse sliding to a stop near Dusty. He looked from Clara to Amos, then to the red cloth caught on the saddlebag. Samuel's face went cold. "What did Pike pay you to do?" he asked. Amos swallowed hard, but before he could speak, a rifle shot cracked somewhere from the trees, not close enough to hit anyone, close enough to warn them. Dusty reared, and Clara grabbed for the saddle horn as Samuel reached across the rain and caught her reins just in time. The warning shot rolled across the wet hills and disappeared into the storm. For one breath, everything held still. Dusty's front hooves struck the mud again, hard enough to splash Clara's skirt. Samuel kept one hand locked around her reins while his blue roan tossed its head beside them. Amos Bell crouched near his trapped horse, pale as candle wax, his fingers dug into the wet saddle leather. Then another sound came from the trees. A branch snapped. Samuel moved without wasting a word. He swung down from his horse, took Clara by the waist, and helped her from Dusty's saddle before she could argue. His touch was quick and steady, not a claim, not a command, only protection in a dangerous second. "Behind the shed," he said. Clara heard the care under the order. This time she obeyed. They moved behind the old lime shed as rain ran from the broken roof in silver ropes. Samuel pulled the horses close to the stone wall, keeping them calm with quiet clicks of his tongue. Dusty trembled once, then settled when Clara placed her hand against his neck. "Easy," she whispered. "Easy, boy." Amos crawled toward them through the mud. "Don't leave me out there," he gasped. Samuel grabbed the back of his coat and dragged him behind the wall just as a rider moved between the trees far up the slope. The man did not come closer. He sat in the rain with his hat low and his horse turned sideways, a dark shape against the gray brush. Clara could not see his face, but she could feel his message. Keep quiet. Samuel watched the rider for a long moment. His jaw worked once. He had no rifle in his hands, only a revolver at his hip, still untouched. "We are riding back," he said. Amos shook his head. "He'll know." "He already knows." "You do not understand Pike," Amos said, voice breaking. "He owns men who wear badges. He owns men who write papers. He can turn a fence rope into a court case and make the truth look like a beggar at the door." Clara stared at him. Rain dripped from her lashes. "Then tell the truth louder," she said. Amos looked at her as if she had suggested standing in front of a train. Samuel's eyes stayed on the rider. "Who cut the gate?" Amos pressed his lips together. "Who cut it?" Samuel repeated. "I did," Amos whispered. Clara felt the words like a slap, though she had already known. "Why?" she asked. Amos wiped rain from his mouth. "Pike told me to." Why would he trouble himself with Samuel's cattle? Clara said. Amos looked down. Samuel answered before Amos could. "Because if my cattle break through Miller's draw and trample Pike's lease strip, he files damages. If I fight him, he drags it through court. If I pay, he gets money. If I refuse, he starts pulling at my credit and title. That is how men like Pike feed." Amos gave a weak nod, and because of her. Clara went cold. Samuel turned slowly. "Speak plain." Amos swallowed. "Pike was angry she paid. Said somebody must have helped her. Said if Reed was putting money behind the Whitcomb place, then Reed needed reminding that kindness carries a cost." The words hung in the rain. Clara looked at Samuel. Water ran down the brim of his hat, hiding part of his face but not the anger in his eyes. It was not wild anger. That might have frightened her less. This was quiet, contained, and heavy. "This is my fault," she said. Samuel looked at her at once. "No. If I had not come to your gate." "No," he said again, stronger. "A wrong man's choice does not belong to the person he tries to hurt." Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly that for a moment she had to look away. The rider in the trees lifted one hand, then turned and disappeared into the storm. Samuel waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then he took a length of rope from his saddlebag, bound Amos's hands in front of him, and freed the clerk's horse from the wire. He did it carefully, even though the man had earned no kindness from him. Clara noticed that. She noticed too much about Samuel Reed. They rode back through the rain with Amos between them. By the time they reached Red Lantern Ranch, the cattle had been turned, the south gate tied shut, and Caleb was pacing near the barn with mud up to his knees. His eyes widened when he saw Amos. "Well," Caleb said, "that ain't a lost heifer." Samuel dismounted. "Put him in the tack room. Do not harm him. Do not let him leave." Caleb nodded. "Yes, sir." Amos looked ready to collapse as Caleb led him away. Clara climbed down from Dusty, stiff with cold. Her dress clung to her legs. Mud covered the hem. Her hands shook now that the danger had passed, but she curled them into fists and hoped Samuel would not see. He saw. "Go inside," he said. "Warm yourself. I am not made of glass." "I know." The quiet answer stopped her. Samuel stepped closer, rain dark on his shoulders. "That is why I am asking, not ordering." Clara looked at him. Something soft passed between them, small but unmistakable. "All right," she said. Inside, the kitchen fire had burned low. Clara fed it, changed into a dry shawl she kept in her satchel, and set coffee to boil with hands that would not steady. She heard men moving outside, voices low, hooves stamping, the scrape of the tack room latch. The letter still sat in her apron pocket, damp at the edge. She took it out and placed it near the stove, not close enough to burn. For Edward Whitcomb concerning Clara, a confession waited in that paper, or a promise, or a mistake. She no longer knew which. Samuel came in half an hour later. He had changed his coat but not his expression. Mud marked his boots. Rain still clung to his hair. He shut the door behind him and stood there for a moment, as if the warmth of the kitchen had surprised him. "Amos will talk to the sheriff in the morning," he said. "Will the sheriff listen?" "Sheriff Boone is not Pike's man." "Is anyone sure of that?" Samuel's mouth tightened. Sure enough to try the law before trying anything worse. Clara poured coffee and set a cup before him. "Good." He looked at her. She held his gaze. "I do not want blood over my land." "You will not have it." "You cannot promise that." "No," Samuel said quietly, "but I can promise I will not be the man who starts it." That mattered. Clara did not know how much until he said it. They sat at the kitchen table with the storm knocking against the windows. For a while neither spoke. The lantern flame moved in the draught, throwing shadows across Samuel's face. Clara could see the weariness in him now, and beneath it the old loneliness that seemed to live in the corners of this house. At last she touched the folded letter. "What does it say?" she asked. Samuel looked at it, then at her. "I remember the meaning, not every word." "Tell me the meaning." He rested both hands around his coffee cup. "It says your father came to me when his cough was already bad. He did not ask for money. He did not ask me to take care of you. He said you would fight any help that smelled like pity, and that I should remember that if the day came." Clara's eyes lowered. "He said Dusty was the only thing you might bring yourself to sell because you would rather break your own heart than lose the farm." Samuel's voice roughened. "He said if that happened, I should not buy the horse unless I meant to give him back." Clara's breath caught. Outside, thunder moved far away over the valley. Samuel continued, "I wrote that I understood. I wrote that if you ever came I would find work, not charity, a place, not a favor, terms you could stand on." Clara stared at the letter. "Why did you never send it?" she whispered. "Because by morning your father was too sick to read it, and after he passed I thought coming to you with those words would sound like I believed grief gave me rights." Clara's eyes burned. She turned her face toward the stove, but the tears came anyway, quiet and hot. Her father had known. He had known the shape of her pride, the strength of her love, and the exact way she would try to survive. He had known she would ride Dusty to Red Lantern Ranch with a price too low and a heart too stubborn to ask for help. Samuel did not move. He gave her silence, and in that silence Clara felt safer than she had in a long time. After a while she wiped her cheek. "Open it." Samuel looked at her. "Please," she said, "I want to hear his name in it." Samuel picked up the letter carefully, broke the old seal, and unfolded the damp paper. Before he could read a single word, Caleb burst through the back door, breathing hard. "Mr. Reed," he said, "Sheriff Boone just rode in." Samuel rose. "Now?" Caleb nodded, rain dripping from his hat. "And he ain't alone." Clara stood. Through the window, lanterns moved in the yard. Horses shifted in the dark. Men's voices rose under the storm. Then Clara saw Martin Pike step down from a black carriage beside the sheriff, smiling like he had come to collect something already promised. If you believe one quiet act of kindness can stand against greed, stay with this story, because the truth in that letter may be the only thing Pike did not plan for. Martin Pike stepped from the black carriage as if the storm had arrived for his benefit. He wore a dark coat buttoned to his throat, polished boots, and the same red silk strip at his watch chain that Clara had seen on Amos Bell's saddlebag. Rain touched the brim of his hat, but not enough to make him look troubled. Some men looked smaller in bad weather. Pike looked like he had brought it with him. Sheriff Boone climbed down from his horse beside the carriage. He was a broad man with a gray mustache, tired eyes, and a coat patched at one elbow. Clara had seen him in town many times, always walking slow, always listening more than he spoke. He did not smile now. 2 deputies sat their horses behind him. Samuel stood at the kitchen door, one hand resting on the frame. Clara stood just behind him, close enough to see rain running down the back of his hand. Pike looked past Samuel and found Clara. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "you seem to turn up wherever trouble starts." Samuel's shoulders tightened. Clara stepped out from behind him before Samuel could answer for her. The porch boards were cold beneath her shoes, and the wind pushed rain against her face. "Trouble knew my name before I reached it," she said. Pike smiled. Pretty words for a woman standing on another man's porch while his cattle break fence. Sheriff Boone looked at Samuel. "Mr. Reed, I received a complaint that you are holding a man here against his will." "Amos Bell cut my south gate," Samuel said. "He confessed." Pike made a soft sound, almost a laugh. "Did he, before or after you tied his hands?" Samuel's voice stayed level. "Before." "Convenient." Clara's hand curled into her shawl. Pike was not frightened of the truth. That was what made him dangerous. He had come prepared to bend it before anyone else could hold it straight. Sheriff Boone removed his hat and wiped rain from his brow. "I will need to speak with Amos." "He is in the tack room," Samuel said, "unharmed." Pike clicked his tongue. Unharmed men do not usually require locked doors. Samuel's eyes did not move from the sheriff. "Ask him yourself." Boone nodded to one deputy. "Bring Bell out." The deputy crossed the yard with Caleb, who had appeared near the barn looking like a wet wolf ready to bite. A few ranch hands gathered by the bunkhouse, quiet and watchful. The lanterns shook in the wind, throwing light across mud, horses, and faces full of doubt. Clara felt the letter in Samuel's hand. He had carried it with him when Caleb burst in. The old paper was folded tight between his fingers, her father's words waiting in the rain. Amos came out of the tack room with his hands untied but held close to his chest. He looked smaller than he had near the lime shed. His hair stuck to his forehead. Mud streaked one side of his coat. When he saw Pike, he stopped walking. Pike gave him a smooth, patient smile. "Amos," he said, "these people claim you have been causing mischief." Amos's mouth opened, but no words came. Sheriff Boone stepped closer. "Mr. Bell, did you cut the Southgate rope on Mr. Reed's ranch?" Amos looked at Samuel, then Clara, then Pike. The silence stretched until it became painful. Pike sighed. "Sheriff, the poor man is frightened." "Wouldn't you be, after being dragged through rain and locked in a tack room by men who need someone to blame?" Samuel took one step forward. "He confessed in front of Miss Whitcomb and me." "And no one else?" Pike asked. Caleb spoke from near the barn. "I saw the cut rope." Pike did not look at him. A rope can be cut by anyone, or by age, or by a ranch hand hoping to hide his own neglect. Caleb's face flushed red. Sheriff Boone raised one hand. "Enough." Rain beat against the yard. Clara watched Amos Bell fold inward under the weight of fear. He was not a brave man. Maybe he had never been. But he had looked at her in the storm and told her to ride on because she did not know what Pike was willing to take. He knew. That knowledge was eating him alive. Clara stepped off the porch. Samuel turned his head. "Clara." She did not stop. Mud touched the hem of her dress as she walked toward Amos. The deputies watched her, uneasy. Pike's smile faded just a little. Clara stopped a few feet from Amos and spoke softly enough that he had to look at her. "My father used to say a man can lose his way through fear," she said, "but he does not have to build a house there." Amos's eyes filled with shame. Pike's voice cut across the yard. "How touching." Clara did not look at him. "You warned me at the shed," she said to Amos. "You said I did not know what he was willing to take. I think you do know. I think he has taken from you already." Amos swallowed. Sheriff Boone watched him closely. Pike stepped forward. "Sheriff, this is foolishness, mister. Bell is my clerk. He was in town all afternoon." "No, I wasn't," Amos whispered. Pike went still. The whole yard seemed to listen. Amos lifted his head, but he did not look at Pike. He looked at Boone. "I cut the rope," he said. "Mr. Pike told me to." Pike's face hardened. "You had better mind yourself." Amos flinched, but the words had started now and could not be put back. He said Mr. Reed helped Miss Whitcomb pay the claim. Said a man who lends a hand should learn what it costs. He told me to loose the cattle toward Miller's Draw, then ride back before anyone saw. Sheriff Boone's eyes sharpened. "And the shot?" Amos shook his head. "Wasn't me, I swear it." Boone looked toward Pike. Pike spread his hands, a frightened liar looking to save himself. Samuel raised the folded letter. "There is more." Clara's breath caught. "Samuel." He looked at her then. In his eyes she saw the question he had promised to ask without words. "May I?" Clara felt the whole night pressing against her. The storm, Pike's smile, Amos's fear, her father's sealed letter, the land her family had held for 21 years, the horse that had carried her to this porch. She nodded. Samuel unfolded the old paper with care. The rain had softened the edges, but the writing remained clear enough under the lantern light. "This letter was written to Edward Whitcomb," Samuel said. "It was not sent. It concerns a conversation I had with him before he passed." Pike laughed once. "A dead man's conversation cannot prove a living claim." "No," Samuel said. "But it can explain why you wanted Miss Whitcomb desperate." Pike's eyes narrowed. Samuel read, not loudly, but with a steadiness that reached every corner of the yard. "Edward came to me today with concern not for his own illness, but for Clara. He believes Martin Pike has offered terms no honest man would offer a sick farmer. He fears the debt will be called once he is gone, and that his daughter will be pressed to sell land, horse, or both before she understands the trap." Clara felt the words strike through her. Her father had known about Pike too. Samuel continued. "He asked me for no rescue. He would not insult her that way. He asked only that if she came to my gate with Dusty, I remember she was not asking for pity. She was asking for a fair road out." The ranch yard blurred before Clara's eyes. She looked at Pike and saw not just the man who had threatened her land, but the shadow her father had feared while pretending not to fear anything at all. Sheriff Boone stepped toward Samuel. "May I see that letter?" Samuel handed it over. Pike's voice sharpened. "Private papers and stable gossip do not make evidence." Boone studied the page beneath the lantern. "No, but they do make reason to examine your claims office." For the first time, Pike looked truly angry. "Careful, Sheriff." Boone folded the letter. "I am." Pike stepped close enough that his polished boots sank into the mud. "You think this little scene will change anything?" A frightened clerk, a woman clinging to a failing farm, and a rancher playing noble because loneliness has made him foolish. Samuel's face went still, but Clara moved first. She walked to Pike and stopped close enough to see the rain gathered on his eyelashes. "You mistook me," she said. Pike sneered. "Did I?" "Yes," Clara said. "You thought I was trying to save a farm because I had nothing else, but I was saving it because it is mine." The words came out stronger than she felt, and maybe that was courage. Not the absence of trembling, but speaking while your heart shook. Sheriff Boone turned to his deputies. "Take Amos Bell into town. He will make a written statement before morning." Pike pointed at Amos. "You will regret this." Amos looked at the ground. "I already do." Boone faced Pike. "And you will come with me." "I have done nothing." "Then you will have no trouble answering questions." Pike's eyes slid to Clara once more. His smile returned, but it had lost its polish. "This is not finished," he said. Clara believed him. That was what frightened her. The sheriff and his deputies rode out with Amos and Pike under the storm, lanterns fading down the road toward Willow Creek. The ranch hands slowly drifted back to their work. Caleb spat into the mud and muttered something unkind under his breath. Clara remained in the yard until the last light disappeared. Samuel came to stand beside her. "I am sorry," he said. "For what?" "For reading the letter in front of them." I nodded. "You did." She looked at him. "Thank you for asking." His eyes softened. "I am trying." The storm eased into a cold mist. Somewhere in the paddock, Dusty lowered his head to the hay Samuel had laid out for him. That small sight, ordinary and gentle after so much fear, nearly brought Clara to tears again. Samuel handed her the letter. She held it with both hands. Her father's words had crossed death, rain, and silence to reach her on a night when she needed them most. But the letter had not ended Pike. It had only pulled the curtain back. And Clara knew, deep in her bones, that men like Martin Pike did not walk away from losing face. Inside the house, the kitchen lamp still burned. The table waited. The coffee had gone cold. Clara folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her heart for one breath before stepping toward the door. Behind her, from far down the road, a single gunshot cracked into the night. Not at the ranch, toward town. Samuel turned sharply. Clara looked toward the darkness where the sheriff's lanterns had vanished, and the cold in her chest had nothing to do with the rain. The gunshot toward town did not echo like the warning shot in the hills. It cracked once, sharp and lonely, then left a silence behind it that made every man in the yard turn his head. Even the horses seemed to feel it. Dusty lifted his white face from the hay, ears stiff, breath misting in the cold night. Clara stood frozen near the kitchen door with her father's letter pressed against her chest. Samuel was already moving. "Caleb," he called, "saddle 2 fresh horses." "I'll get 3, Caleb said. Samuel looked at him. Caleb did not look away. "If you think I'm letting you ride toward that alone, you have been kicked in the head worse than I knew." Under another sky, Clara might have smiled. But the road to Willow Creek lay black beneath the rain, and somewhere down that road were Sheriff Boone, Amos Bell, Martin Pike, and a gunshot that had no honest reason to exist. Samuel turned to Clara. "You should stay here." She looked at him for a long moment. He closed his eyes briefly, as if he heard his own mistake the moment it left his mouth. Then he opened them again. "I am asking you to stay where it is safer, not because you are weak, because Pike has already used your name once tonight." Clara's anger softened before it could rise. "That is better," she said. "I am learning under poor conditions." "You are." The faintest warmth passed through his tired face, but it was gone quickly. Clara looked toward the road. Rain softened the lantern light into golden fog. Her hands were cold around the letter. Part of her wanted to stay, to keep Dusty safe, to lock the door and let men with badges carry the danger. But her father's name had been read aloud in that yard. Her land was tied to this. Amos had confessed because she asked him to stand somewhere other than fear. She could not hide behind a kitchen wall now. "I am coming," she said. Samuel did not argue. That alone told her how much the night had changed him. "Then you ride between Caleb and me," he said. "If I tell you to turn back, you decide for yourself, but hear me first." "That is fair." Caleb brought the horses. Clara still chose Dusty. The old gelding was wet, tired, and flecked with mud, but when Clara touched his neck, he leaned into her palm. He had carried her through worse than rain. He had carried her through grief, debt, pride, and the long road between losing a father and finding out he had left one last door open. "I know, boy," she whispered. "One more ride." They took the road at a hard pace. The storm had begun to thin, leaving the world slick and shining under ragged clouds. The moon showed itself for a breath, then vanished again. Water ran in the wagon ruts. Cottonwood branches scratched at the sky. Ahead, Willow Creek glowed faintly, a cluster of lamps and windows pressed into the dark. No one spoke for the first mile. Then Caleb, riding on Clara's left, muttered, "I never liked Pike's carriage." Clara glanced at him. "His carriage?" "Too clean." Despite herself, Clara asked, A carriage can be too clean. In mud country, yes, ma'am, means either a man does no work or he makes someone else scrub away the evidence. Samuel rode just ahead and Clara saw his shoulders move once. Not quite laughter, but close. The small sound steadied her. They reached the edge of town near the livery. A lamp swung outside the stable, its light bending in the wind. No music came from the saloon. No voices rose from the boardwalk. Willow Creek had the hush of a town that had heard something it was not ready to name. Sheriff Boone's horse stood tied outside the doctor's office. So did one deputy, S. Pike's black carriage waited across the street empty. Samuel dismounted first. Clara followed, her boots splashing into a shallow puddle. Caleb tied the horses while Samuel crossed toward the doctor's porch. The door opened before he reached it. Dr. Hiram Vale stepped out with his sleeves rolled and a blood-stained towel in his hand. Clara's breath caught at the sight, but there was no horror in the doctor's face, only strain. "Sheriff's alive," he said before anyone asked. Bullet grazed his side. Painful, not fatal. Clara let out a breath she had not known she held. "Amos?" Samuel asked. Locked in the back room with Deputy Marsh watching him, scared, half senseless but standing. "And Pike," Clara said. Dr. Vale's face darkened. "Gone." Samuel stepped onto the porch. "Gone where?" "That is the question." The doctor glanced up and down the street before lowering his voice. "Boone says they were halfway to town when a rider came hard from the alley beside Fletcher's feed store. Fired once. Boone's horse spooked and threw him. In the confusion, Pike cut loose toward the north road." "He was not under guard?" Caleb asked. "He was riding beside Boone, not tied. Boone had only just said he was bringing him in for questions." Caleb swore under his breath. Samuel looked toward the north road. Who was the rider? Boone did not see his face. Clara looked across the street at Pike's carriage. Its black paint shone under the rain. "Too clean," Caleb had said. Then she noticed something beneath the carriage step. A pale scrap of paper pressed into the mud. She crossed the street before Samuel could stop her and crouched beside the wheel. The paper was folded small, already soaked through at one edge. She lifted it carefully. It was not a letter. It was a torn piece from a ledger page. Numbers ran down one side, names down the other. Whitcomb was one of them, so was Reed. And below them, in hurried pencil, were 3 words that made Clara's stomach turn cold: "Collect before hearing." Samuel came up beside her. "What is it?" She handed him the paper. His face tightened as he read. Dr. Vale stepped closer, lamp in hand. "That looks like court language." Clara's fingers felt numb. "What hearing?" A weak voice answered from the doctor's doorway. "Monday morning." They turned. Amos Bell stood inside, one hand braced against the frame with Deputy Marsh behind him. His face was drawn, but there was a different look in his eyes now. Fear still lived there, but so did surrender. The kind that comes when a man has run out of lies and found the truth waiting anyway. "Pike filed petitions last week," Amos said. "Secret ones. Claims of unpaid taxes, broken grazing agreements, disputed boundaries. He planned to have the papers signed before folks knew to appear." Samuel stared at him. "Against how many?" Amos swallowed. 7 properties. Clara looked down at the torn ledger. 7 properties, 7 families, 7 doors where men like Pike might arrive with papers and polite smiles. Her father had not been Pike's only target. "Why Reed?" Caleb asked. "Because Mr. Reed has money enough to fight," Amos said. Pike wanted him tangled up first, distracted, angry, made to look careless after the cattle crossed. Then Miss Whitcomb's farm would seem like a smaller thing beside it. Samuel's hand closed slowly around the wet paper. Clara felt the night tilt under her feet. Pike had not only tried to take her land. He had arranged the town like pieces on a checkerboard. Her debt, Samuel's fence, Amos's fear, the sheriff's delay, all of it meant to keep honest people arriving too late. "Where is Pike going?" Samuel asked. Amos looked toward the north road. "If he is running, maybe Pine Hollow. He keeps a room there." "And if he is not running?" Clara asked. Amos's face went pale again. Then he is going to Judge Caro's house tonight to get signatures before Boone can stop him. Dr. Vale lifted the lamp higher. Judge Caro lives 5 miles north. Samuel turned to Caleb. Ride back to the ranch. Wake Jonah and Will. Send them to every name on that page. Tell those families to be at the courthouse before sunup. Caleb nodded. And you? Samuel looked at Clara. He did not tell her to stay. He did not decide for her. We ride north, he said. Clara tucked her father's letter inside her coat and took the torn ledger page from Samuel. No, she said. We ride to my farm first. Samuel frowned. Clara, if Pike reaches the judge. He will not go to the judge empty-handed, Clara said. Her voice shook, but her mind had gone clear. If he filed against 7 properties, he needs papers, ledgers, claims, proof he can twist. Amos stared at her. He keeps copies in his office. He keeps official copies there, Clara said. But my father once told me a man like Pike always keeps his real book where he thinks no one will look. Samuel's eyes sharpened. And where is that? Clara looked toward the dark road leading away from town, toward the little house where her lamp still burned in the front window. My father's last letter said Pike offered terms no honest man would offer a sick farmer, she said. That means father had papers, maybe notes, maybe proof. I never opened the tin box after he died, not all the way. Samuel understood then. The answer might not be in Pike's office. It might be under a loose floorboard in Clara's own kitchen, waiting with her mother's ribbon and all the grief she had been too afraid to touch. They rode hard for the Whitcomb place. The rain had stopped by the time the house came into view, but the clouds still hung low. The lamp in the window burned exactly as Clara had left it, small and brave against the dark. Dusty slowed near the barn, breathing hard. Clara slid down and nearly stumbled, but Samuel's hand caught her elbow. She let it. Together they entered the house. The kitchen smelled of cold ashes, bread crust, and old wood. Clara knelt by the stove and lifted the loose floorboard. Her fingers found the tin box. For a moment she could not open it. Samuel knelt beside her, close but not touching. Take your time. We may not have time. Then take your breath. She looked at him. That was not a command. It was kindness in plain clothes. Clara opened the box. Inside were receipts, tax notices, her mother's blue ribbon, and the letter she had never reopened. Beneath them sat something she did not remember placing there. A small brown ledger tied with twine. Her father's handwriting marked the cover. Pike Dealings, read if pressed. Clara's hand covered her mouth. Samuel looked at the ledger, then at her. Outside, a horse moved in the yard, not Dusty. Samuel rose slowly and reached for the lamp. Clara heard the soft creak of a boot on her porch. Then Martin Pike's voice came through the door, smooth as ever. Miss Whitcomb, he called. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Martin Pike's voice waited outside Clara's door like a hand around a throat. Miss Whitcomb, he called again. Open up. There is no need to make this unpleasant. Samuel stood beside the stove with the lamp in one hand and his body half in front of Clara without fully blocking her. That small difference mattered. He was not putting her behind him like a child. He was standing where danger would meet him first while still leaving her room to choose. Clara held the brown ledger against her chest. Her father's handwriting stared up from the cover. Pike Dealings. Read if pressed. She had spent months afraid to open old grief. Now grief had become proof. Samuel lowered his voice. Back room window. Clara shook her head. No. Clara. This is my house. Outside, Pike laughed softly. I can hear you deciding foolishly. Samuel's jaw tightened. Clara looked around the kitchen. It was the same kitchen where she had kneaded bread at dawn, counted coins by lamplight, and learned to swallow tears before they reached her chin. The stove was cold now. Her father's chair sat empty near the table. A chipped blue cup rested upside down on the shelf because she still set it there as if he might ask for coffee one morning. Pike would not take this room from her in the dark. She set the brown ledger on the table, then tucked Samuel's unsent letter beside it. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. What do you want, Mr. Pike? The floorboards outside gave one soft groan. "I want what was stolen from me." "What?" "You will have to be more particular," Samuel said. "You have tried to own half the valley." There was a pause. Pike's voice lost some of its smoothness. "Reed, you should have stayed on your big ranch and minded your cattle." "I tried that," Samuel said. "You cut my fence." Clara heard another horse shift outside. Pike was not alone. She looked at Samuel. He looked toward the front window, then moved slowly, keeping low beside the wall. Through the thin curtain, Clara saw three shapes in the yard: Pike near the porch steps, another man by the gate, a third holding the horses near the well. No one carried a rifle openly, but that did not comfort her. "Sheriff Boone knows," Clara called. Amos told him. "Amos is weak," Pike replied. "Weak men change their stories when they remember who keeps their mothers in coal through winter." Clara's stomach tightened. Samuel's eyes hardened. "Is that how you bought him?" "I buy what people are willing to sell." Clara looked down at the ledger. Her father had written those words once. Not exactly, but close. On a cold evening near the end, while his cough shook the walls, he had told her that Martin Pike never stole what a person guarded well. He waited until sorrow, hunger, or fear made them set it down. She had not understood then. She understood now. Samuel moved back beside her. "If they rush the door, go through the bedroom." "No. This is not pride now." "It is not," Clara whispered. "It is timing." He looked at her. She opened the ledger. The first page carried dates, names, and sums in her father's careful hand. Not only his own dealings. Other names from Willow Creek appeared there too. Miller, Dawson, Reed, Harper, Bell. Notes filled the margins. Payment altered after signature. Interest added without witness. Tax claim transferred before notice. Boundary fee invented. Clara turned another page. A folded paper fell out. Samuel picked it up, opened it, and went still. "What is it?" Clara asked. "A copy of Pike's agreement with your father." "My father's debt." Samuel shook his head. "Not yours, Pike's." Clara stared at him. Outside, Pike knocked once, hard enough to rattle the door. "Last chance, Miss Whitcomb." Samuel handed her the paper. Under the lamplight, Clara read slowly. Her father had loaned Martin Pike $80 7 years earlier, before Pike owned his office, before his polished boots and black carriage. Pike had signed against a small mining claim near Pine Hollow. If unpaid, the claim transferred to Edward Whitcomb. At the bottom, in faded ink, were two signatures: Martin Pike, Edward Whitcomb. Clara's mouth went dry. Did Pike repay it? Samuel turned the ledger toward her. Edward had written one line beneath the folded agreement: "No repayment recorded." Pike demanded paper returned. Refused. Clara looked toward the door. The thing Pike wanted was not the ledger only. It was this: proof that the man taking land across the valley had once owed land himself to the farmer he tried to crush. And if that mining claim had grown valuable, then Pike's whole standing could crack like dry clay. Samuel seemed to understand at the same moment. "He is not here to scare you," he said. "He is here to bury this." The back window shattered. Glass burst across the floor near the washstand. Clara flinched, and Samuel pulled her away from the spray. A hand reached through the broken pane, fumbling for the latch. Samuel grabbed the iron stove poker and struck the window frame, not the hand, hard enough to make the intruder curse and stumble back. "Bedroom," Samuel said. This time Clara obeyed, but she snatched the ledger and agreement first. They moved fast through the narrow hall. A lantern swung in Samuel's hand, throwing wild shadows across the walls. Clara's father's coat hung by the bedroom door, still holding the shape of him in the shoulders. She caught it in passing and nearly stopped. Not now. Samuel pushed open the bedroom window. Cold night air rushed in. He climbed out first, then reached back. Clara handed him the ledger, then stepped onto the crate beneath the window and climbed through with his hand steady at her wrist. Behind them, the kitchen door burst open. Pike's voice cut through the house. "Find it." Clara and Samuel crouched beneath the window, hidden by the rain barrel and the dark line of lilac bushes her mother had planted years ago. Dusty stood near the barn, tied where Clara had left him. His white coat was too bright in the dark, but he stood silent, as if he understood every breath mattered. The man near the well turned toward the house, drawn by the noise inside. Samuel leaned close to Clara's ear. "Can you reach Dusty?" "Yes. I will draw them toward the road." "No. There are 3. And one of you. Clara." She turned to him, and even in the dark she could see his fear, not for himself, for her. That fear almost broke her. Instead, she put the ledger back in his hands. "You are better at carrying heavy things. I am better at knowing this place." Before he could answer, she slipped along the side of the house. Clara moved low, her skirt gathering mud, her breath held tight in her chest. She knew every root, every loose stone, every board that creaked near the porch. This was not just her house. It was a map written in her bones. The man by the well heard something and turned. Clara picked up a small stone and tossed it toward the chicken shed. It struck the tin roof with a sharp ping. The man moved that way. Samuel crossed the yard behind him, silent and quick for a man his size. He reached Dusty and untied the reins. Then Pike stepped out onto the porch with a lantern raised high. Light spilled over the yard. Clara froze behind the woodpile. Pike saw Samuel first. "There," he shouted. The man by the gate ran toward Dusty. Samuel swung into the saddle with the ledger tucked under his coat, but Dusty was Clara's horse, and Dusty did not move for Samuel's hands the way he moved for Clara's voice. "Dusty," Clara called. The horse turned his head. Samuel looked toward her, startled. Clara ran from the woodpile as Pike's lantern light found her. Mud pulled at her boots. Her hair had come loose from its pins. Cold air burned her throat. "Stop her," Pike yelled. The man from the well lunged. Dusty lunged first. The old horse jerked hard against Samuel's grip, knocking the man sideways just enough for Clara to reach the saddle. Samuel caught her arm and pulled her up behind him in one clean motion. "Go," Clara cried. This time Dusty obeyed. The white gelding tore across the yard, past the well, past the broken fence, past the little house where Pike's men had come hunting for truth in the dark. A shout rose behind them. A shot cracked into the air, high and wild, meant to frighten more than hit. Clara buried one hand in Samuel's coat and the other in Dusty's mane. They reached the road at a hard run, but instead of turning toward Willow Creek, Samuel pulled Dusty south. "The town is north," Clara shouted over the wind. "And Pike expects north," Samuel answered. "Where are we going?" Samuel leaned low over Dusty's neck as the horse thundered into the open dark. "To the one man Pike has not bought." Clara looked back once. Behind them her house stood with its kitchen door open, lantern light spilling out like a wound. Pike was on the porch, small in the distance but still watching. Clara clutched the ledger beneath Samuel's coat and felt the folded agreement pressing against her hand. Tell me in the comments, would you have run for town or trusted Samuel's plan? Because before sunrise, Clara must decide whether the proof in her hands can save the valley or cost her the only home she has left. Dusty carried them south through the dark as if he had been born from moonlight and warning. Clara sat behind Samuel with one arm around his waist and the other pressed hard against the ledger beneath his coat. The folded agreement lay tucked inside her bodice, close to her heart, where no hand but hers could reach it. Behind them, hoofbeats struck the road in angry bursts. Pike's men had found their horses quickly. The wind had turned cold after the rain. It pushed Clara's loose hair across her face and dried the mud on her skirt until it stiffened against her legs. Every breath tasted of wet grass, horse sweat, and fear. Samuel leaned forward over Dusty's neck. "Hold tight." "I am." The old gelding thundered down a narrow cattle trail that bent away from the main road. Clara knew at once where Samuel was taking them and her stomach tightened. "Mercer's Crossing." She called. "Yes." "The bridge washed out last spring." "Not for a horse that trusts his feet." "Samuel Reed, that is not as comforting as you think." For the first time that night she heard him give a breath that was almost a laugh. It vanished as a shout rose behind them. A rider had closed the distance. Clara looked back and saw a dark shape cresting the hill, then another behind him. No lanterns, no badges, just men paid to do what Martin Pike could later deny. Samuel guided Dusty off the trail and into the low brush. Branches slapped Clara's sleeves. The land dipped sharply and the sound of water grew louder ahead. Mercer's Creek ran high from the storm, fast and silver under the broken clouds. The old crossing appeared between two cottonwoods. It had once been a narrow wooden bridge. Now only half remained, sagging from the far bank with a few strong beams stretching over the water like ribs. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. Dusty slowed. Samuel pulled back just enough to let the horse look. "Easy," Samuel whispered. "You know the ground better than we do." Clara closed her eyes for one breath. Her father's voice came back to her, worn and warm. "Let him see the path, Clara. A good horse has eyes in his feet." Dusty stepped onto the first beam. Wood groaned. Clara held so tightly to Samuel's coat that her knuckles ached. The creek rushed below, dark and swollen, carrying broken twigs and foam. Dusty took another step, then another. His hooves found each place with careful courage. Behind them, one of Pike's men shouted, "They're crossing." A shot cracked into the air. Dusty flinched, but Samuel laid a steady hand along his neck. Clara bent close and whispered into the horse's mane, "Steady, boy, steady. Take us home one more time." The word home slipped out before she could stop it. She did not know if she meant the Whitcomb farm, Red Lantern Ranch, or some place still being built between two people who had not yet named it. Dusty reached the far side and lunged up the muddy bank. The last beam snapped behind him and dropped into the water with a heavy splash. Pike's riders cursed from the other side, trapped by the creek. Samuel did not slow until the shouts faded. They rode through an old pasture, past a leaning windmill and toward a lonely cabin on the rise. A lantern burned in its window. Clara knew the place, though she had never entered it. Eli Mercer lived there, a former deputy with one bad leg and a reputation for never taking money from men he did not respect. Her father had once said Eli had lost his badge because he would not bend his neck to powerful men. Samuel swung down before the porch. Mercer. The door opened with a shotgun resting in the crook of one arm, pointed at the floor but ready to lift. Eli Mercer was thin, gray-haired, and sharp-eyed. His beard was trimmed close. One suspender hung loose over his shoulder, and his left leg braced stiffly against the doorframe. "Well," Eli said, looking from Samuel to Clara to Dusty's heaving sides, "that horse looks like he carried the whole county on his back." "He may have," Clara said, sliding down with Samuel's help. Eli's eyes moved to her. "You Edward Whitcomb's girl?" Clara nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then come in." No questions, no delay. Inside, the cabin was warm and plain. A kettle sat on the stove. A map of the county hung on one wall with pins stuck along property lines. Clara noticed that at once. Eli Mercer had not stopped caring about the law just because the law had stopped paying him. Samuel laid the brown ledger on the table. Clara took the folded agreement from inside her dress and placed it beside it with careful hands. Eli limped closer. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "Pike's true dealings," Clara said. "My father kept notes. Names, altered terms, false claims, and a debt Pike owed him years ago." Eli's face changed at the name Pike, not surprise, recognition. He opened the ledger and read in silence. Samuel stood near the door, listening for riders. Clara stood by the table, unable to sit. The room felt too small for the weight of what her father had hidden under her floor. After several minutes, Eli looked up. "Your father was a careful man." "He taught me to be," Clara said. "He was careful enough to scare Pike." Samuel turned from the door. "Can this stop the hearing?" "It can delay it," Eli said. "Stopping it takes a judge with a spine and witnesses willing to stand in daylight." "Will Judge Caro stand?" Clara asked. Eli's mouth pulled to one side. "Caro is not bought, but he is old, tired, and too fond of clean paperwork. Pike knows that. If Pike reaches him first with polished lies, this gets harder." Samuel looked toward the window. "Then we ride now." Eli closed the ledger. "No, you ride when you have more than two voices." Clara frowned. "There is no time." There is enough if folks are already being woken. Caleb, Jonah, Will, the 7 families. Hope rose in Clara's chest, fragile but real. Eli went to a small shelf and took down a tin whistle on a cord. He opened the back door and blew 3 sharp notes into the night. The sound cut across the hills, strange and bird-like. Clara stared at him. Eli shut the door. Old signal. Men who used to ride honest still remember it. Samuel's brow lifted. How many? Enough to make Pike wish he had chosen banking in Kansas. Clara almost smiled, but her eyes were too full. Eli looked at her more gently then. Your father brought me copies 2 months before he died. Said he had more hidden at home. Said Clara would find them when she was ready. Clara gripped the edge of the table. He told you that. He said you were strong, but grief makes even strong folks walk around certain rooms in their own heart. Eli tapped the ledger. He figured one day Pike would press hard enough that you would have to open the door. Clara looked down at her father's handwriting. All those months, she had thought the unopened tin box was a sign of weakness. But maybe her father had not left proof where she could find it quickly. Maybe he had left it where only need, courage, and the right moment would bring her. Samuel stepped beside her. Clara. She looked up. His voice was low. He trusted you with the ending. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. Outside, far off, another whistle answered. Then another. Then hoofbeats began to gather in the hills. Eli Mercer picked up the ledger and wrapped it in oilcloth. We leave in 10 minutes. Samuel looked at Clara. Are you ready? Clara turned toward the window. Dawn had not come yet, but the black sky in the east had softened at the edge. Somewhere beyond that darkness waited Willow Creek, Judge Caro, Martin Pike, and every person who had been told they were too small to fight clean papers and dirty men. She touched Dusty's bridle hanging over the chair where Samuel had placed it. My father waited long enough, she said. So have I. By the time they rode toward Willow Creek, they were no longer 3 people carrying a ledger. They were 12 riders, 7 families, 1 limping former deputy, a quiet rancher, a woman with mud on her dress, and a white horse walking at the front like he knew the road to justice better than any man there. And at the courthouse steps, under the first pale light of morning, Martin Pike was waiting with Judge Caro's door already open behind him. Martin Pike stood on the courthouse steps beneath the first pale light of morning, holding himself like a man who had already won. His black coat was clean again. Clara noticed that first. Somehow, after rain, mud, broken glass, and a night spent chasing stolen proof across the valley, Pike looked as polished as a preacher on Sunday. His hat sat straight. His boots shone. His red watch ribbon showed against his vest like a small wound he had chosen to wear. Behind him, Judge Caro's office door stood open. Judge Nathaniel Caro waited inside, thin and gray, wrapped in a wool coat, one hand resting on his cane. He looked displeased at being dragged into business before sunrise, but not surprised. A stack of papers sat on his desk. Pike's papers. Clara's stomach tightened. Dusty slowed at the foot of the courthouse steps, sides heaving, white coat streaked with mud and sweat. Samuel dismounted first, then helped Clara down. He did not hold her longer than needed, but his hand stayed near her elbow until he was sure her feet had steadied. Behind them, the others rode in. Eli Mercer came first, stiff-legged but straight-backed. Then Caleb and the Reed hands. Then the Miller family, old Mrs. Dawson with her son beside her, Jacob Harper from the North Creek claim, Amos Bell's mother wrapped in a brown shawl, and 3 more neighbors whose names Clara knew from church, market, or her father's careful ledger. 7 properties, 7 families, 7 reasons Pike had counted on silence. Pike's smile flickered when he saw them all, only for a moment. Then it returned. Well, he said, looking over the gathering, a parade before breakfast. Eli Mercer stepped forward with the oilcloth-wrapped ledger tucked beneath one arm. No parade, witnesses. Judge Caro moved to the doorway. What is the meaning of this? Pike turned smoothly. Exactly what I warned you about, Judge. Desperate people making noise because lawful claims have finally come due. Clara stepped toward the stairs. Samuel did not stop her. Her hands shook, but she climbed anyway, one step, then another. Mud stained her dress. Her hair had come loose. Her face felt raw from wind and rain. She did not look like a woman who belonged before a judge, but she looked like a woman who had arrived. "Judge Caro," she said, "my name is Clara Whitcomb. My father was Edward Whitcomb." What? The judge's tired eyes sharpened. "I knew your father. He kept records of Martin Pike's dealings." Pike gave a small laugh. "A dead farmer's private notes are not law." "No," Clara said, "but signed agreements are." She pulled the folded paper from inside her coat. The corners were bent. The ink had faded, but the names remained clear. Samuel came to stand one step below her, not in front of her, not behind her, but close enough that she could feel his steadiness beside her. Clara handed the paper to Judge Caro. The judge opened it slowly. His brow drew down as he read. Pike's smile began to thin. "That document is old," Pike said. "Worthless." Judge Caro did not look up. "It appears to be an agreement between you and Edward Whitcomb." "A settled matter." "Is it?" "Of course." Clara turned to the brown ledger Eli held. "My father wrote that no repayment was recorded." Pike's voice sharpened. "Your father wrote many things, I am sure. Grief makes daughters worship every scrap of ink." The words struck Clara hard, but she did not step back. Samuel did, just one step upward. Pike saw it and smiled. "Careful, Reed. I would hate for the court to see temper where there should be truth." Samuel stopped. His jaw held tight. Then he looked at Clara, and in his eyes she saw the choice he was making. Not anger, trust. He stepped back down. Clara faced Pike again. "You are right about one thing," she said. "I did worship every scrap of ink after he died. That is why I could not open the box where he left this. It hurt too much. But my father did not leave these papers so I could grieve over them. He left them so I could stand here." Eli unwrapped the ledger and handed it to Judge Caro. The judge took it inside to his desk. The crowd waited in the cold morning while he turned the pages. No one spoke. A horse snorted near the hitching rail. Mrs. Dawson held her shawl closed with one trembling hand. Amos Bell's mother stared at Pike with a grief that looked older than dawn. Pike tried one last time. "Judge, you know as well as I do that private ledgers can be invented." Eli Mercer lifted his chin. "Not when the entries match county transfer dates." Judge Caro looked at him. Eli continued, "I brought copies from the old deputy files. Before I was removed, I copied several notices because Pike's claims smelled rotten then too." Pike's face changed. There it was, the crack beneath the polish. Eli took folded papers from his coat and laid them on the judge's desk. Tax notices delivered late. Interest added before grace periods ended. Boundary fees charged without survey. 7 families at least, maybe more. Judge Caro looked from Eli's papers to Edward Whitcomb's ledger, then to Martin Pike. "Mr. Pike," the judge said slowly, "you told me these petitions were uncontested." "They were," Pike said, "until this morning's performance. You told me proper notice had been given." "It was." Mrs. Dawson stepped forward from the crowd. "No, Judge. My notice was nailed to my barn door after midnight. My boy found it this morning when Mr. Reed's man woke us." Jacob Harper raised a paper. "Mine too." Mr. Miller lifted his hand. "Mine never came at all." One by one, voices rose, not shouting, not wild, just truth after truth, plain as fence posts in daylight. Pike looked at them with disgust. "Do you think sob stories erase debt?" "No," Clara said, "but lies do not create it." That silenced him. Judge Caro closed the ledger. The sound was soft, but it carried. "These petitions are suspended," he said. "All pending claims filed by Martin Pike will be reviewed in open court with notice to every property holder named. Sheriff Boone will take statements from all witnesses when he is able." Pike stepped forward. "You have no cause to damage my business." Judge Caro's eyes hardened. "Mr. Pike, from what I have seen, your business has done that itself." A murmur moved through the crowd. Pike looked at Clara then. For the first time since she had known him, his expression held no smile at all. "You think this saves you?" he said. Clara held her father's ledger against her chest. "No, the truth saved me. I only finally opened the box." Sheriff Boone arrived just after sunrise, pale but upright, riding in a wagon beside Dr. Vale. His side was bandaged, his coat buttoned crooked over it. When he stepped down, he leaned on the doctor's arm, then waved him away with irritation. "I am not dead," he muttered. Caleb, standing nearby, said, "Glad you cleared that up, Sheriff." Boone gave him a look, then turned to Pike. Amos Bell, brought from the doctor's office by Deputy Marsh, gave his statement before the courthouse door with half the town listening. His voice shook, but he did not take back a word. He told of the cut fence, the false notices, the hidden petitions, the pressure put on his sick mother's coal bill, and the rider paid to frighten the sheriff's horse. Pike denied everything. But denial sounded different after morning came. By noon, Martin Pike was no longer standing on the courthouse steps like a man collecting property. He was standing beside a deputy, his coat still clean, but his face gray with the knowledge that clean cloth could not cover dirty work forever. Justice did not come with shouting. It did not come with revenge. It came through ledgers, witnesses, a tired judge, a wounded sheriff, a frightened clerk who finally told the truth, and a woman who opened the one box grief had kept closed. The Whitcomb farm did not go to auction. Neither did the Miller place, the Dawson pasture, the Harper claim, or the small strips of land that had nearly been taken by ink before their owners even knew to fight. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek changed in small ways first. People began reading every paper before signing it. Neighbors compared notices. Sheriff Boone placed a locked complaint box inside the courthouse and told folks he would rather read 10 foolish worries than miss one true warning. Eli Mercer was asked to serve again as deputy clerk, bad leg and all. He accepted after making Judge Caro admit in public that stubborn honesty had value even when it limped. As for Amos Bell, he was not forgiven all at once. That would have been too easy. But Clara saw him one afternoon delivering coal to his mother's porch with his own hands, no longer Pike's clerk, no longer hiding behind fear. When he saw Clara across the street, he removed his hat. She nodded once. Sometimes that was where healing began. At Red Lantern Ranch, Clara kept the position Samuel had offered her, $3 a week at first because terms mattered. Then after a month she asked to renegotiate herself. Samuel sat across from her at the kitchen table, trying very hard not to smile. "You are certain?" he asked. "I found $23 in waste last week," she said. "If you can afford to lose that, you can afford to pay me $5. I can afford $6. $5. Clara. $6 sounds like charity. $5 and a share of recovered overcharges." She considered him. "That is fair." "I am learning." "You are." Dusty settled into the Red Lantern paddock as if he owned it. He learned which ranch hands carried apples, which gates were easiest to lean over, and which windows Clara might open if he tapped the sill with his nose. Caleb claimed the horse judged him. Clara told him Dusty had excellent judgment. The Whitcomb farm remained Clara's. That was never in question again. She repaired the well rope, patched the roof, and planted the north field with Samuel's team helping only after she asked. On the first warm day of spring, she opened every window in the house and cleaned the room where her father had died. She shook out his coat, folded it, and placed it in the cedar chest with his Bible and her mother's ribbon. Then she sat on the floor beside the loose board and cried until the house no longer felt like it was holding its breath. Samuel waited on the porch the whole time, not inside, not away, near enough. That evening, Clara brought out 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him. The sunset burned soft over the fields. Dusty grazed by the fence, his white coat glowing in the last light. "My father knew," she said. Samuel looked at her. "About Pike." "About Pike, about me." She looked toward Dusty. "About you." Samuel's hand rested on his knee. His fingers opened once, then closed, as if he was deciding whether courage could fit into such a quiet moment. "Clara," he said. "Yes. I care for you." She looked down at her coffee cup. The words did not frighten her as she had expected. They settled warm and steady like a lantern being placed in a dark room. "I know," she said. He gave a soft breath. "I am trying to say it plain." "You did. I do not want to decide anything for you." "Good. I do not want to rescue you." "Better. I would like to walk beside you, if you ever decide there is room." Clara looked at him then. His face was turned toward the fields, but his heart was in his hands, quiet and unguarded. This was not a man offering a grand speech. This was a man offering a way of living. Slowly, Clara reached over and placed her hand on his. "There may be room," she said. Samuel did not close his fingers over hers right away. He waited. So Clara closed hers first. Summer came green and bright to Willow Creek. The valley healed in the way land heals, not by forgetting the storm, but by growing through it. Clara rode between the Whitcomb farm and Red Lantern Ranch on Dusty, who took the road like a horse that had known from the beginning where it would lead. One Sunday after church, Judge Caro stopped Clara near the gate and returned her father's ledger. "It belongs with you," he said. Clara held it carefully. "No, it belongs where people can learn from it." So the ledger stayed at the courthouse, not hidden under a floorboard but placed in a locked case where any farmer could ask to see the record of how a valley nearly lost itself to quiet greed and found its courage through shared truth. But Clara kept the folded agreement. She placed it in the tin box, beside her mother's ribbon and Samuel's unsent letter, not because she was afraid anymore, but because some papers were not merely proof. Some were bridges. A year later, in the same little kitchen where Pike had once demanded what did not belong to him, Clara stood in a cream dress she had sewn herself. Samuel waited on the porch, wearing his best shirt and looking as uncomfortable in it as any honest rancher would. Caleb had already cried once and threatened anyone who mentioned it. They married under the cottonwood trees between the Whitcomb farm and Red Lantern Ranch, with Dusty tied nearby in a wreath of wildflowers he kept trying to eat. When the preacher asked who gave Clara away, no one answered at first. Then Clara smiled softly and touched the tin box resting on a small table beside her. "My father already did," she said. Samuel's eyes shone, but he did not look away. After the vows, when the neighbors cheered and the wind moved through the cottonwoods, Clara looked across the two pieces of land. Her father's little farm, Samuel's wide ranch, the road between them, the horse that had carried her from one life into another without ever truly being sold. She had gone to Red Lantern Ranch with a price too small for what she loved. She had returned with proof, courage, and a future built on fair terms. And long after the guests had gone, when the lamps glowed warm in both houses and the moon rose over Willow Creek, Clara stood at the fence with Samuel beside her. Dusty lifted his head from the grass and looked at them with calm, knowing eyes. "He always knew," Clara said. Samuel smiled. "Your father." Clara touched Dusty's white mane, both of them. If this story reminded you that love should never take away your dignity, give it a like and stay with us for more emotional Wild West stories where truth, courage, and kindness still matter. And on that quiet frontier night, with her hand in Samuel's and Dusty grazing under the stars, Clara finally understood the last gift her father had left her. Not the farm. Not the ledger, not even the horse. He had left her a road back to hope.